Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me. I'm Greg Swartz. I'm the big man half of Big Man Dram, and I'm happily back with my Dram, which has been missing the past few weeks, but it's not missing now, but I'm not going to drink it yet. First thing I'm going to do is bring in my guests, and that's right. And if you've read about this, if you're here this week, you probably know this week I'm having two guests. Russell Brinklow from Gordon MacPhail is joining us, along with Keith Duncan, who is a longtime friend of the film, and he helps administer the Facebook group. And silly enough, offered to join me last week while he'd had a few drinks. So now he's been pinned in and he's going to be joining us. So without further ado.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hello. Double trouble.
Indeed. Indeed.
You should have put us either side of your head. So we could pin in the middle. So.
You know, I'll be honest with you. For the life of me, I don't know how StreamYard chooses who's in what order. Because when we were just talking before this, we were in a different order. I think it's some sort of algorithmic thing based on who's most appealing, and Russell won this time.
I certainly shouldn't be in the middle.
Yeah, for the life of me, I have no idea. I could probably look it up. I wonder sometimes when I've had occasionally there's been more than one person in these StreamYard events, even if they weren't this. But in any case, thanks for joining me, guys.
That's no problem. It's a pleasure to be
here. I know it's Friday night for you guys. It's just lunchtime for me.
I've already been home, had my dinner. I've had my evening nap. So yeah, ready. It's party time now. So yeah. And the dog's actually come up. She's gone to her bed. She's lying in her bed beside me. She's like, "This is bedtime, Dad."
Do you know one of the very first ones of these we ever did? We had Jenna Eli, who at the time Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, now Duncan Taylor. She was our guest. You know, she's in the film, and she has a bulldog of some variety. I forget what type it is, but she has a dog who was asleep at her feet while we were interviewing her, and the dog kept snoring throughout the interview, and you could hear it. If you go back and watch it, you can actually.
That might happen tonight. This is a bit of a snore.
Well, I'm back. My dry month is over, and I'm back, and this is what I've poured to start things off.
Excellent, perfect.
I'm a long time favorite of mine. I don't have. I'm a big fan of the 18-year-old, but I don't have any right now. So
I think Keith and I are both twinning it up on the old Cara Gold from Ben Rumwick, which was 2022 bottling for the contrast. So really interesting whiskey. This is the second bottle that I've had, and the Cara Gold malt is the only one that's actually palatable to. It's almost like cereal. I was up. We'll probably find out later on, but previous job at the maltings at Crisps on a number of occasions, and Richard. Oh gosh, can't remember Richard's surname now. That's terrible. My memory's awful from time to time. But the manager there does a fantastic presentation and then takes you around the maltings, and you obviously get to see the malt in its various stages. And then there's jars of chocolate malt and caramel malt and all sorts. And the caramel malt, I was happy. It's not very good for your teeth, but I was happily crunching away in it. It's just like breakfast cereal. Really quite nice. So yeah. So Slange, everybody. Cheers.
Slange. Let me ask you a question, completely unrelated, but well, not completely unrelated, but maybe you'll know. What is the term? Maltsters will make a beer to try, and it's not like a commercial beer. It's just literally to try. I think there's no hops in it. They just make it so you can test side by side what this barley will taste like in its malted form, and they just make a quick beer out of it. I don't want to say it's called flash beer. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's not.
So we filmed in a Maltsters here. And they had basically taken 5 varieties of barley and made let's call it a flash beer. I'm drawing a blank on the name. And the idea is that they make it really quickly, and it's not meant to be released. It's not even meant to be necessarily palatable, but it's a way you can drink the 5 barleys instead of just chewing them. Or you know, it's closer related to whiskey, at least. So anyway, that's a better way to do it on your teeth than chewing up that.
Well, indeed, yes. but to be fair, I did have a chew of the nuggets they put together for the animal feed as well. It wasn't very good.
Your career as a cow is very short-lived.
Well, it was a short-lived one, absolutely. I starved. Good fat in this cow, yeah.
So as people who are watching this will know, we're finally getting really a lot of headway with our independent bottling film.
Mm-hmm.
And so just in case anyone seeing this doesn't know, when we made The Water of Life, we had so much amazing footage and so much was left over and not used. One day we joked, oh, we have enough footage here to make another film. And then we sort of looked at each other, the editor and I, and we were like, wait a minute, what if we did make another film? And one of the big reasons for that is we had spent so much time at Ben Romick and Gordon MacPhail and weren't able to use some of it. And it was really good stuff. It was just, we've used as much as we could and it's in the film. It's just, there was more and there was more really interesting stuff. And so we thought we'd make a companion film about independent bottling. And so over the pandemic, we've been bit by bit piecing together this entire story. And it's been absolutely amazing. And what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks is called a watch down, where I'm watching all of the footage and all of the interviews. And it's incredible, and, one of them is, your colleague, Russell, is Stephen Rankin, who we interviewed extensively, repeatedly. I don't think I realized just how much we took up his time. We interviewed him like 3 times for hours at a time each.
Yeah.
But it's, it's funny because Gordon MacPhail is such a unique place, even within the world of independent bottling, because it's I realized it saying independent bottling isn't even really accurate. It's like independent whiskey makers is what you prefer. It's really what you're doing.
I guess independent bottling is continued, but yeah, I guess whiskey makers. I think, well, not whiskey makers because you're not making. Well, you are kind of making the whiskey. You're either further maturing it or you're buying in new make spirit, which has very much been Gordon MacPhail's model. Michael, who was the third generation, that was quoted as saying, or one of the quotes around the company is that we, at that particular time, obviously before we bought Ben Romick, the saying was, we don't make whiskey, we mature it. Yeah, so we don't make whiskey, we mature it. So it was very much about whiskey producers, I suppose, if you like, yeah, and bottling of different whiskies. But yeah, no, you're right. Stephen's very, very generous with his time as well, which is something I've kind of got to realise more since I've been there. It's just 6 months now. It feels like I've been with the company quite a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, it's I know you basically, it's like working at a living museum of whiskey. I think the oldest whiskeys in the world are, oftentimes come from Gordon MacPhail.
It's probably always been the case, and I think there's very few other companies out there that have got spirit of that age. I think Duncan Taylor would probably be about the other one that might compete in terms of doing that. But again, back to the family model with John and George in the very early days, deciding that that's what they wanted to do, and filling casks from the 1930s. You're going to eventually accumulate a lot of fantastic old aged whiskies, and the cask sort of management of that, the experience that the family have gained over the years is second to none. So not only are you releasing really, really good old whiskies, but at fantastic strength with good volume as well. So crazy outruns from some of these old whiskies. It's just fantastic.
Our friend Juliette Buchan from Glenallachie said G&M are whiskey curators. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's funny. So for the independent bottling film, and I'll let you explain a bit what the cairn is in a second, but because I'll just quickly say, Gordon MacPhail has opened another distillery, a new one called the Cairn. And we interviewed, for the independent bottling film, we interviewed Ewan McIntosh. And he was talking to us in that interview about how, some of the casks that have already been laid down there are already, likely, he said, some of these casks will probably, be 50 years old before they're released. And it's amazing to sort of see that Gordon MacPhail, long game being applied right from the get-go, with the new side.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very visionary company. Very, very, very visionary. And I guess as Charles MacLean said at one time, George, second generation, John's son, very much the father of single malt whiskey. So, yeah.
What can you tell me about the cairn? Because I've not been to it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Benromach, but I've not been to the cairn.
So, well, I mean, it's very, very different from Benromach, as you know, having been to Benromach. It's very much hand-on, handcrafted. Everything is done by hand there. The computer system consists of a pocket calculator, and you'll have seen all the charts around where mathematics is used to kind of measure what you need to do when you need to do it. And having spent a day there as part of the job as a whisky advisor at the shop in Elgin, part of our training is you get to spend a day with the distillers. So I'm going to be going to the cairn in 2 or 3 weeks' time to get my experience up there. But I've been to Benromach and basically ran around the distillery following the stillmen who are just continually on the go. Because as they open one valve, or as they close one valve, they open another, and basically the system just goes round and round. So it's fantastic, hands-on, good old-fashioned whiskey making. And the cairn being brand new and up-to-date technology, based at the sort of the mouth of the Cairngorms, if you like. So the distillery looks right into the Cairngorm Mountains. It's overlooking the River Spey. Absolutely fantastic position. But with modern technology and computer technology, one of these places where you can sit with an iPad and control what's actually going on. So very, very different. The other thing to say about the cairn, and again, one of the great things about the company, Gordon MacPhail, is that they want to produce a whiskey that's 12 years old. So as most people will know, with most modern distilleries these days, there's a bit of pressure to get some cash flow in. And a lot of distilleries will want to release something as soon as they can, so 3-4 years old, and in the meantime perhaps be making gin or aquavite or some of these things to get some cash flow. Gordon MacPhail, being a long-standing company, decided they wanted the whiskey to be released at 12 years old. I've got a very, very good idea about the flavour profile they want for that as well, and we are already filling for that, so we have casks maturing already on the warehouses at Benromach. So in the meantime, obviously, there's a visitor centre, there's a fantastic restaurant. We want people to go to visit the facility. We want people to go and see it. So, what are we going to give people to try once they're there? Well, let's put together some blended malt whiskies from the store of whiskey that we've got. So they've put together wonderful 12-year-old, absolutely fantastic 18, and then a range of whiskies, one including a 57-year-old. Because 57 degrees north is the latitude of the distillery. The bottlings are called CRN 57. And then, let's put together a 70-year-old blended malt as well that can be available to purchase at the distillery. So just an incredible project, and one that's very, very exciting. Looking forward to it. My only regret is I'm getting on in years, so maybe not going to see the kind of really old stuff coming out of the cairn, which would be nice, but something for the future generations.
Well, isn't that always the case with Gordon MacPhail? Like
yes,
the people that are the people that are laying down whiskey now aren't going to get to yeah.
But it's like these people that build these great parks, where they plant trees and they lay out grounds, and they never get to see the full benefit of that. It's very much for the future generations. So I know for certain the family are very, very, very proud of of John in particular and George over the years for the work that they did in setting down the foundations for the way the company is now.
It's really an interesting, because so many larger bottlers have started buying or building distilleries, and now in this film that we're working on, we've interviewed a number of them, and there's an entire scene in the film about that. And I'm going to say at least half of them said, well, this has been going on for some time. Gordon MacPhail sort of started the whole thing, with Benromach, and then the second stage is then build one. And, and it's sort of really about controlling the supply chain, and basically having input from distillery to glass.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. But I mean, if you got to think about it, the very early days when you were filling lots of liquid from lots of different distilleries, none of these distilleries had their own brand either. So, with the sort of growth of single malt, a lot of these distilleries would have wanted to, or have wanted to, develop their own brand. Gordon MacPhail were the official bottlers for a lot of these distilleries over the years, before they developed their own brand. So it stands to reason that supply is going to slow down a little bit, because they're going to, understandably, these distilleries, these companies want to keep the liquid for themselves, for their own brand. So I think most independent bottlers have recognised that over the years, that in order to get some control over supply, and potentially also to be able to have spirit that you can then barter with others to get spirit back. That's always been the way of working within the whiskey industry, has been trading spirit, trading casks or something like that. It stands to reason you want to build your own distillery, but obviously it was also a long-held desire of the company to own a distillery. They did put in a bid for Strathisla historically, a 70,000 bid that was outbid by 1,000 by Seagram's. So it may well have been that Gordon MacPhail might have actually been a distillery owner long before they actually managed to buy Benromach.
Huh. I didn't know that. So we have a question for you, Russell. Our friend Rick Johnson says, I'm unclear, is the cairn set up as old school or modern and computerized?
Modern and computerized, Rick. Yeah.
Yeah, Benromach's the one that's super old school, right? That's we actually filmed a sequence for The Water of Life that we wound up not using, where we followed at Benromach. We followed a mash with the camera every stage of the way, every knob that was turned, every pipe, everything. And once we edited it together, we were like, oh, that's actually a little bit too long, because it's so involved. It's so, there's so many steps. It was just like, it just kind of came across as, it would be great as a sort of an industrial manual, but it wasn't exactly fun. And, it was so involved.
It's good to see some of these things. Kilhoman did a fantastic set of small clips that I think they posted them on Instagram, and it was little things like seeing the barley being steeped, it being poured onto the floor, and then, sweeping it down and scooping it back up and then taking it on and seeing it being smoked. So yeah, some of these clips are brilliant, I think, for whiskey geeks who want to see just how that works, because you very rarely get to see that when you do a distillery tour. You get to see the equipment. Sometimes you'll get to see the mass tun full. Sometimes you'll realize the pot stills are bubbling away, but you very rarely get to follow the process of what's actually going on. And you'll know yourself, being in Benromach is fantastic, because you get to hold onto a pipe to wait till it goes cold. Oh, right, that's cold water coming through now, so you can turn that valve, and it's what us geeks want to see and do. I think my understanding of working in a distillery is that once you've actually learned how to do it all, it can actually become a bit repetitive, which seems ridiculous for us fans, that you might think, oh, this has just become a job. But I guess that's the same as anything. When I used to work in the health service many years ago, I was the mental health nurse, and one of the sort of tasks that we had to do from time to time, when some people were very unwell, we had to do what I think called special nursing. And that was really when you were literally just within touching distance of someone who, was very unwell, maybe a risk to their own health or a risk to somebody else's. And I remember one particular person being on renal dialysis, and because of their physical condition, so they had to go to the general hospital for that. And we as their mental health nurse had to go and sit with them while they were getting the dialysis. And I remember looking at all these valves and dials and all sorts of things, and saying to one of the nurses there, this must be really, really interesting, man. It just looks fascinating. And she's like, yeah, first couple of months it was pretty interesting, but it's not just it's boring, because it's the same thing every day. Yeah, I know. Yeah, turn that dial. So some of these things, if you're doing the same process, and I guess at the end of the day, whiskey is batch after batch after batch. It's literally the same process. You mash, you ferment, you distill.
Yeah.
But yeah.
When talking about like being a cooper, it looks fascinating when you don't know what you're doing, but
once you're putting a cask together every day and you start smashing your thumb about,
when I worked at the Glasgow distillery, I got to try. I followed a mash throughout the week, and especially the first day, I was terrified. They said, go over there and throw that valve, and I was like, this one here. Yeah. Turn it 90 degrees. 90 degrees. And then I don't know if this was just hazing or this actually was true, but they had told me that the day before I started there, one of the assistant mashman had like screwed up, basically hit the mash with cold water, and it was and they had to like immediately try to hit it with hot water, but not scald it, and it was like they were riding it. And I mean, Lachlan, who was the head distiller at the time, stayed all night. Like it was like someone with a newborn baby that was, in the NICU, and it was, he was just, but they saved it. They actually saved the match. But it wasn't the one I did. I did the next one. So,
some of the guys that work in these kind of situations almost kind of like it when something was slightly wrong, because that's exciting. I've now got to fix this. I need to think about how I'm going to do this. And
it was also, they also got to give a ton of shit to the distiller, the mashman who had screwed it up, because they just made fun of him the whole rest of the weekend.
There's that as well. As long as it's not you that did it, of course. Yeah.
We have lots of we don't have any more questions, but there's lots and lots of people saying hello. Mark Pruitt is saying hello. Mari saying hello. Trinity saying hello.
Mari's in Barcelona. She was I assume she's in Barcelona just now. She's from Barcelona, certainly. She was on the Whisky Academy from my old job at Inverdudy Whisky Shop.
Fantastic. Well, I have a question for you, Keith.
No,
it's an easy question. Have you been to Ben Romick?
That's okay then. Have I been
to Ben Romick?
I haven't. No, it's not one of the ones I've been to. Yeah, I'd like to go there. No, it's one of the ones that I think I do prefer the old school ones that picked up on Rick's comment earlier on. I think some of the modern distilleries, they do look a little bit too clinical, a bit too factory-like, whereas some of the old school ones, it's still got that charm about it, and the, years and years and years worth of peat smoke, and that smells in the air stuck in the wood. It's certainly a charm to that.
Well, when we filmed there, I was immediately taken by the place too. I have a thing for the old school distilleries too, and the very, obviously Bruichladdich is very much that way, and we spent so much time filming there as well. And it's just, it just sort of feels you're able to become part of the equation. You know what I mean? Like you're like a cog in the machine when you're there. I mean, even if you're watching it, let alone doing it. So there's been a lot of, over the last 2 years, there's been some rebranding going on, Russell, with specifically with Ben Romick. I mean, not just the new labels and all, but also the lines, like the contrast line, for example. And, can you tell a little bit about that? Because I honestly kind of, I'm not going to know as much as you anyway, but I'm not.
I guess the contrast line is an opportunity. When you talk about doing the same thing day in, day out, the contrast line, I guess, is one of these opportunities to do something a little bit different. So you've got the standard, obviously, the 10, 15, the 21, and the cask strength batches that are there and readily available. And the contrast are the single casks or the small batch of something a little bit different. So you've got things like Cara Gold, you've got maybe a bit more heavily sherried. There's an organic batch that comes out from time to time, and sometimes maybe a wine finish or something like that as well, or a wine maturation. I shouldn't say finish because it's only ever one cask use at our first fill at Ben Romick as well. So I think the contrast is a nice way just to experiment a little bit and do things a little bit different. So it gives everybody involved with it the chance to have something different from time to time. And I think that's probably what most distilleries are doing these days is there's a little bit of different batches that provide something a little bit different. And in my mind, it's not too much of that. So there are some cases where distilleries often release an awful lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
It gets a little bit confusing what's actually going on. But I like the way Ben Romick do it, where you've got a beautifully wonderful, steady core range, and then these contrasts that just come out just to kind of give you something different from time to time.
I have
Sorry, Keith.
Sorry, Keith.
I was just going to say it's echoed in your in the Gordon MacPhail range as well, where you've got the Discovery range, and then you've got the other ranges that come out above that as well. So you see the same kind of pattern there, and people know where they're comfortable particular price ranges, and then they can step up if that's, if they get a liking for a particular distillery, or the way in which the distilleries, the spirit, is handled by, and worked on by Gordon MacPhail. Get that?
Oh, absolutely, and you're right. The discovery range is very much, kind of introduction to whiskey, and an opportunity, and a kind of nice, the color coordination with the green bottles, flavor profile. So the green bottles being bourbon matured, so you've got your tropical fruits, your lovely kind of creamy vanilla kind of notes. The purple being the sherry maturation, so people who like that kind of Christmas cake, those kind of winter spices, and the richer fruits and the chocolates and stuff like that. And then the grey ones being the peat. So you immediately know, I like the peat one. So you go to the grey ones and there's one from Kalila there, there's a Lajig, there's a Wiener haven't had that before. So you immediately know you're probably going to like it because you like that flavour profile. So it's a nice, easy way to just kind of know what you're choosing. The distillery labels obviously harken back to having license to bottle under the distillery label from. Yep, absolutely, from those particular whiskies, and that's really very much a recognition of the standing that Gordon MacPhail have historically had. Connoisseurs range, once upon a time, there would have been mostly vatings along the line of that as well, and there'll be people out there who have had some great bottles of that. It was kind of a little bit before my time in getting involved in drinking Gordon MacPhail bottles, if you like. So I never really got a chance to come across many of those, but these days Connoisseurs range is more single cask. And again, that recognises the growing appetite for cask strength whiskey, and certainly the limited sort of the way that a single cask bottling is that limited by nature, so something that's going to be different all the time. And then obviously going up into the private collection and the more expensive stuff, and you've then got the rare recollection series where you've got whiskies from all the closed distilleries and the likes of that as well. So there's something there for everybody, I guess, and for every budget as well. Unfortunately, the budget for the ones I would like to buy doesn't quite fit my pocket.
I saw you posted the 74-year-old one the other day.
Yes,
like James Julio's comment. I'm going to wait for the 75.
That's right. I think it was Rick's on tonight, and Rick's had kind of said, why not wait for 75? Why would you bottle something at 74 years old when you could wait till it was 75? And I hope Rick didn't think I was being sort of cheeky in any way, but my feeling was that if you're managing, there's a kind of conversation sometimes within a company that when they bottle one of these older casks, it's like saying cheerio to an old friend, because that cask's been looked after for more than 70 years. The cask's going to be emptied, so it's not there anymore. It's in bottles. It's out. People are hopefully enjoying it around the world. But if it's ready at 74, it's ready at 74. Why would you wait? And then I was thinking, if I live till 74, I'll see that as a bit of a success. 75 is not going to make me feel any better. So why is 74 a lesser number than 75? It's still a very, very significant age to get a whiskey to in fantastic condition. So always cheeky, but never offended.
So in a second, Rick asked us another question I'm going to put up here in a second, but I want to ask you something else, or actually say something, get your comments on it. But I think it's the distillery label series with Gordon MacPhail is a real testament to brands trusting Gordon MacPhail, and I know because I've been immersed in this for the last couple of weeks, I know I've frequently heard people talk about, Gordon MacPhail's attitude has always been to compliment, not compete with. And that's funny because it's such that feels like a relationship that would not likely start today. The companies are so ferociously protective of brands and stuff, but it's like a trusted partnership that goes back, multiple generations. It wasn't even, these relationships weren't started by the current people with the current people.
Yeah, absolutely, and very much gentlemen's agreements. Handshakes. And a trust and a faith, and I guess if you're going to do that with something, I guess there was a little bit back in the day as well that seemed as being a little bit crazy. Independent bottlers, and I'm sure Gordon MacPhail was one of them. The people who were out there blending, and 99.9% of whiskey back in those days was for blends. Maybe seemed to be a little bit crazy to be thinking, well, we're going to bottle these under the one distillery You can imagine some of these blenders saying, "Well, why on earth would you do that? You need to mix it with 40 other whiskies to make it palatable." So to have that, that's a crazy conversation that you might think now these days. The craving for single malts now, and blends is still the biggest by some massive distance product of Scotch out there in the world. But from those of us who are immersed in drinking single malt, the idea that we should never have done this in the first place is just crazy,
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, the trust was put in there, and I think you're right. I think as a company, we'd never have wanted to upset anybody by doing something better or worse. It would have been a case of let's just do something good with this, and as you say, complement, not compete. So absolutely.
It's funny because Stephen. So I'm referring to Stephen Rankin at Gordon MacPhail. When we were interviewing him, he showed us price sheets from the 40s, 50s, and he was talking about how there was literally a financial disincentive to aging your whiskey as a single malt back then, because he said the difference, and he actually showed us this, the difference that you would get between selling a whiskey at 3 years old to a blender versus what you would get as a 10-year-old single malt was maybe £3.
Yeah.
And why would you set all those years on this for virtually no difference in what you're going to make off of it? I mean, it's just taking up space and time and resources for nothing, for no gain. But for whatever reason, they did it anyway. And I'm sure they're quite glad they did now.
Foresight.
Yeah.
Incredible foresight. Absolutely incredible foresight.
Yeah.
And it would be great. It'd be absolutely fabulous if John or Mr. George were able to see just right now some of these things that are actually happening. It'd be wonderful for you to see that.
Keith, we should start a distillery. You know where the hole in the marketplace is now? No one does this. We should start a distillery that only makes whiskey for blends. That's all we're doing is we're just selling to blenders. But they all say it's all going to be
full circle.
Yeah. We're just selling to blenders. It's not going to be great. It's going to be cheap as chips. And we're just going to sell it to blenders. There's no story.
Back at the beginning again. Yeah.
It's just a factory, guys. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, exactly. We're also going to make industrial lubricants on the other side of the building.
And lots of hand sanitizer for the next pandemic coming round.
Oh,
So we have a really good question that and this is going to help me pivot to the next thing I wanted to talk about anyway. So Rick Johnson had asked you, Russell, do you see any changes in the makeup of people attending G&M tastings these days? Younger, older, more or less knowledgeable?
It's almost an impossible question for me to answer, Rick, because I've not been there that long. So to compare who used to be going to these tastings, I can only think back to when my father many years ago was on the committee for a social club, and part of the sort of perks of being on the committee was that every now and again they would organise a bus trip off to a distillery, and back then I guess I can only imagine it was Glenfiddich or something like that, so there weren't that many visitor centres, and these would have all been, I say old men, they would have been my age. I don't consider myself as old. I don't think any of us would consider ourselves as old these days, but back then you were old when you were in your late 20s, weren't you? And you look at photographs of your parents when they were young, they look much older than we do when we're this age. So it would have been seen, I think, to be a kind of an old man's kind of game, really, more than anything else. But the kind of people that come for tastings now are every age and from every background. And I think that there's more and more of that sort of coming along. Met a lovely Canadian couple yesterday who were over. They actually got married here 3 days ago, and their whole holiday and their whole reason for coming over here was they loved Scotland and they loved Scotch, and they must have been in their mid-20s, and they were very, very knowledgeable of what they understood about it, and bought a great bottle of whiskey to take home, and they're going to be coming back and doing a tasting for their honeymoon next year, they said. So that kind of person, I guess, back in my dad's age, would not have been the kind of people that would have been going on whiskey tastings. But even in my 20s, when I was young and married and had kids, whiskey drinking and whiskey distillery visiting was not something that was even close to being on my agenda. So whereas I think now, if I was in my mid-20s now, I might actually be thinking, yes, this looks quite interesting. So yeah, there has to be a change.
Do you think the gin drinking maybe takes a part in drawing people towards the distillery, and then they start with the gin, and then because gin is hugely popular as well?
I don't think so. I think the branding. I think the branding of whiskey, the availability of it, and the fact that there are so many visitor centres out there as well is something to do. You know, if you're on holiday, it's definitely something to do. I don't remember, you know, when my kids were little and stuff like that, thinking that there were distilleries available to go and visit that I might have gone to. My wife at the time, she certainly would not have been in any way interested in that. So I think it's a lot of these places are kind of catered for families as well now. So they've got restaurants and all sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's just a completely different group of people coming along. But more than anything else, I think the biggest change for me, Rick, is that people come along to tasting to genuinely learn something. Whereas I'm pretty sure when my dad went off to the distillery with his committee members, they went off to get drunk. And that was very much the only reason for going off on that day. I mean, they might have learned something, but I can't remember him ever coming back being able to speak comprehensively at all. Whereas now you go to a tasting, and not only that, there are a lot of groups of people who come to tastings who actually don't finish their drinks. They just actually have a taste of them all, and that's all they actually want. So I know that wouldn't be the case for me, and I know it definitely wouldn't have been the case for my dad's generation. They'd have had everything, and they'd have taken the bottle and finished that as well. But there's lots of people these days going to tastings and literally tasting and understanding. And yeah, I don't need to be drunk. That's fantastic. So yeah, there's definitely changes in the people who come along, and the reasons why they come to tastings. And that's what we want as well. You know, our motto in the drinks industry, and certainly in the whiskey industry, is to drink less but drink better. And through Gordon MacPhail, you can certainly drink better for sure. I mean, that's the quality of product available through Gordon MacPhail is quite incredible.
Well, I know that, you know, you guys, I think you yourself, right? You occasionally run these kind of defunct distillery tastings or old and rare tastings, or you know, the sort of living history of whiskey tastings. Yeah.
You know, I've not hosted any of those yet. I've certainly been aware of them, and I've been involved in a couple. It's, I guess, from a host point of view, it takes a little bit more kind of education and reading to beef up on that kind of thing, to be able to tell a story of an old distillery, because it's not a product you're handling on a daily basis. It's not a distillery you're talking about on a daily basis. Clearly, as a whiskey fan, as a fan of whiskey history, you do read up about these, you are aware of them. But you want to have a little bit more knowledge, because people coming along to do those tastings are paying a lot of money for it. So you want to be able to give them as much information as you possibly can. But the level of analysis is usually much higher for those as well. So you've got people who really know their whiskey by this stage and want to try and understand what's going on in that glass that's different from what it is now. You certainly wouldn't get people getting hammered, if you like, coming along to a rare and vintage tasting. I mean, it would be a waste of time. I mean, you'd almost want to say, guys, let's just go down to the pub. I'll buy you pints for the day if you want to get drunk, but don't be doing it on this. You have to be. You just shouldn't be doing that. My sister's partner just now, he's a little bit older than me. He used to work for one of the brewery companies, and I remember going to a concert in my sister's town, and we'd been at the concert in the hall where they were serving cheap beer and White and Mackay whiskey, and we were pretty drunk. And there was a late night session down in the hotel. It was in Pitlochry. And I'm at the bar, and I'm like, "You want a dram?" And he's like, "Yeah, fine." And I went like that, and he just took my arm and went, "No, bottom shelf." He said, "We've been drinking all day. We're not drinking anything from up there tonight. We'll come back tomorrow afternoon. We'll drink that, because we're wasting our time drinking that now. We're not going to get the benefit of it." And that's very much the case. If you're going to go and do these expensive tastings, I think you have to take them as a customer. You have to take them seriously, because you're paying a lot of money, so you really want to learn something from it as well, I think.
I should have got it, but before for this conversation, because it's a Gordon MacPhail, but it's in my liquor cabinet. You're just gonna have to trust me. I have a little 25 ml bottle of a 50-year-old 1965 Strathisla.
Nice.
And and I never know when to drink it. I'm always like, it makes me evaluate special moments in my life. Like, is this special enough for this? And so far, nothing is qualified. I haven't had any more kids since I've gotten it or anything. So
it's an interesting one. I think I've got a new theory on that, and I would have fallen into that kind of way of thinking over the years. But I think my theory on that now is that drinking it creates a special moment, because the special moment is actually drinking that whiskey. So as soon as you decide you're going to do it, that is the special moment, because special moments in your life happen all the time. And if anniversaries, when children are born, all these kind of things, you think, should that be the day I have a great drink? No, it should be the day you should just be celebrating that event, or tasting, or getting the opportunity to taste a really special dram is the special moment. And I would qualify that by saying that one of the Whisky Academy trips that I did through the Inverurie shop, we got an absolutely fantastic tour of Glenglassaugh with Stuart Buchanan. Brilliant day. We were up there for 3 hours. We could have been there all day. We had to leave for another appointment because we had 2 other things to do that day. But I don't think any of us wanted to actually leave. And it was very much the highlight of everybody's week. And he poured 3 drams. And none of them were younger than, the youngest was 39, I think it was 39, 41 and 42 years old. And the manager's dram, I think it was the Bert Forsyth, I think was the name of the manager's dram. I was driving, so I didn't get to try anything, but Stuart had poured for himself just to nose while he was talking about it, and just poured all his drams into my sample bottles for me to take home. And I tried the 42, and I can only describe it as being indescribable. It was just the most mind-blowing nose and taste of anything I'd ever tasted from an alcoholic point of view. And that has become a special moment. And all I was actually doing that day was sitting at a computer doing a bit of writing for some of the work I was doing at the shop at the time. And I hold on to that moment sitting at that desk as a special moment, because I was able to share it with that whiskey.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. It's funny. I have one of those that I didn't even taste. It's just a story I was told. And I just love this story so much. When I was just in Scotland in June, my taxi driver and I started talking about whiskey in Glasgow. And he said his cousin's son had just graduated from Glasgow Uni, and they had a big family party, and his cousin pulled out, his cousin had pulled out I want to say it was a 1977 Ardbeg that he'd had. And he said he started pouring everybody drams of it. And he said another cousin who he's not related to on the other side of the family, he said he immediately went to the refrigerator and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm getting a Diet Coke. I like to drink my whiskey with Diet Coke." And I won't attempt to do this great Glaswegian taxi driver's accent, but he said, "Gias that back, you're getting the groose." And he took it back from him, and he said it actually led to like a real falling out between the two of them. They which I just found very funny. It's the opposite of your story, actually. But it's funny. I have a question about the old and rare, the old and rare tastings, but I'm completely distracted. Not completely, but I told you beforehand, I love the Gordon MacPhail Scapa releases. I love, because Scapa is one of those brands I think they don't do enough with it. What I mean? Their official bottlings there are few and far between, and they're not particularly unique or anything, and there's very few of them. There's something about the finish on them that just sticks with me every time I've ever had one. This is maybe my 3rd or 4th different one, and I just absolutely love them. And it's something just clicks, and it's a whiskey that drives me to distraction.
There's a mineral salinity about Scapa that's just very, very engaging. It's one of my first ever favourite whiskies. I'm not sure about yourself, Keith, but it was Old Pulteney, the Old Pulteney 12-year-old that I had the very first time. It was the first time I ever had that kind of salty, saline, kind of mouth coating kind of feel. But for me, Scapa does that and more, So, and it's got that kind of. There's a beautiful. I'm not a big fan of lemon as a flavour, but I like things like limoncello. But as lemon as a flavour, I mean, I can't think of anything more disgusting than lemon chicken. I mean, it almost turns my stomach thinking about it. And the creamy lemon flavour you get in a Scapa as well is just absolutely fantastic. And that with the salinity, it's very, very unique, isn't it?
Yeah, that salinity note. I love all the whiskeys that have that. It's just right up the west coast of Scotland. All those whiskeys that you can get that. I love them all. It's just I think it might speak why I'm such a pretzel fan. I just love salt.
Yeah. I've started buying the salted butter, the butter with lumps of crystallized salt in it as well, which I'm sure is not very good for my heart. But
hey, I'll tell you, you could probably get it much more easily there than I can here because it's from there in Ayr. Well, yeah, it's in Ayr. It's in Ayrshire. Blackthorn salt.
Okay.
It's unbelievable. It's so good. It's like that Muldoon's, but it's better.
Yes.
It's better than that. And we visited it when I was there in June, and they have a blackthorn wall, which is a medieval technology of how to capture salt out of the air. It's just a giant wall of blackthorn branches, and it just captures the sea air, and the salt sticks to it, and they sort of rinse it down.
Brilliant.
Good stuff.
Absolutely.
You got my sweet spot there, or my salt spot.
I bought Rachel, my wife's a great cook. She loves to cook, and she's very, very, very good at it. Often think that should have been her career, but I think she enjoys doing it more than actually the pressure of being in a kitchen, perhaps. But I bought her a book all about salt for Christmas, one of her Christmas presents last year. And I found myself sort of reading it, and just this guy's discovery and journey using salt, and just the simple matter of how it changes tomatoes and stuff like that. It's just,
So Mark Pruitt has a question that this is one of the things that, I was assuming we'd get asked at some point, which is, what about Gordon MacPhail's recent announcement to cut back on bottlings? And I think that's been so widely misunderstood.
Yeah.
And I just figured maybe you could help give us some clarity on that.
I think that is the genuine kind of misunderstanding along the way. People think that Gordon MacPhail are going to stop bottling independently, and that's not the case at all. So the announcement, was it maybe about two months ago now, that from next year, as a company, we're going to stop filling casks. So obviously bottling and filling are two different things. As a company, we've always filled new make from many distilleries across the country, and we're going to no longer fill from these different distilleries, by which we're not going to buy any more raw spirit. But in terms of bottling, that's going to continue for many decades to come. Obviously, as a company, we've been accumulating stock for many years, and continue to hold stock of that as well. So we will all probably be long gone before independent bottling stops at Gordon MacPhail. So there's none of us that need to worry about that at all.
I was just thinking, nobody watching this podcast, this broadcast, really needs to worry about it. I don't think.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There'll be plenty more about it.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the sort of timeline there, the sort of speed of time that Gordon MacPhail thinks in is you lay down whiskey for generations to come. You can sort of, the strategy has to reach out that far as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The skill in knowing how to mature. Maturation is absolutely the key skill as a company that we've always had. And obviously now we own 2 distilleries, so we can now make our own spirit as well. And so it's not going to be cut.
Here's a question for you: are you going to sell any of the spirit from your own distilleries to other independent bottlers?
Well, I can't answer that question because I'm not somebody that would be that person.
It's likely.
I just work in the shop. I have absolutely no idea. I mean, it's really genuinely not something that anybody that works in the shop would be able to answer. But
that's a great question, Keith, because I'll tell you, working on this film right now, we've interviewed a lot of the bottlers around Scotland who are now operating, building, buying distilleries, right? And we've asked that question a lot of times. Are you going to sell new make to bottlers? And no one has said no. No one has said no. Some have said we don't know yet, but some have said, we really believe in the swaps we always have, and I don't see why we wouldn't continue honoring that from the other side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean,
and that goes from the littlest ones to the biggest ones.
Yeah, as a whiskey fan and somebody who's just observed it, so speaking on a completely personal level, you can never say never in any line of business. So if it made sense for any company to do that kind of thing, then why not? I mean, I was really intrigued by an Adelphi bottle last year that was a independent bottling of Ardnamurchan, which I thought was fantastic. So Adelphi, who own Ardnamurchan, bottling a bottle of Ardnamurchan and bottling it as an independent bottle. So who knows? Gordon MacPhail might bottle a bottle of the Cairn at some point in the future as under the Gordon MacPhail label, but you just can never tell. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the evolving business that whiskey is.
I don't know they do it anymore, but Signatory used to release Edredauer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah. But I genuinely can't answer the question because I genuinely don't know, and I certainly wouldn't be involved in that sort of decision making anyway.
So Rick asks, "Will all the remaining G&M releases will keep getting older and more expensive?" But I imagine Gordon MacPhail has hundreds and hundreds of casks that aren't even old enough to be whiskey yet, right?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, anybody who isn't filling anymore, their stock's going to get older. But again, Rick, I'm no offense at all, but I don't think you need to worry about it, boy.
It's funny. It's one of the things that we've come across as a storyline in that is some of the brands are basically the bottlers over a century have kind of created this monster that now has sort of sidelined it. It's a sort of the monster turning on Dr. Frankenstein. And what I mean by that is you take a brand, and there's plenty, but Glentalker's, perfect example. Never an official bottling, never available as its own, core release, never. Bit by bit, it starts to gain sort of some kind of traction within the industry or within the fan base. And then all of a sudden someone at the parent company says, well, wait a minute, why don't we bottle this?
Mm-hmm.
And then, so like the groundwork has been sown by these independent bottles that have come out for decades and decades. I mean, Scapa is probably a pretty good example of it. Kleinlease, Linkwood, Dalyuen, Kalila. There's loads of them that are either have never been bottled officially or very rarely so, like Altavane. Okay, help me. How I've been told different answers by so many different people. Altavane,
Altavanya. Yeah.
Okay.
Burn. Just say burn of the milk.
Yeah.
The milky burn. Yeah.
Milky burn.
The milky burn. Like burn as in not being burnt, but the stream.
Yeah.
Altavanya.
There you go. Well, so they've just started releasing, right? Didn't they just do an official bottling maybe a year or so ago?
So yeah, the sort of distillery bottlings that you get, you can pick them up in the visitor centre in Strathisla. I guess you can get them in the Aberlour shop and in the Glenlivet shop. So they've got these in the range. They've got Glenlivets, Glentalkers, Scapas, Dalmonics, and Altavanya. Yeah. But they're not. It's not. I've not seen them in huge amounts. Obviously, I mean, a lot of these distilleries are starting to think that might be a good idea to do that and to have them in their own visitor centre makes absolute sense. It makes a reason to go and visit some of these shops. To pop into Glenlivet, even if you're not a Glenlivet fan, you can pick up a bottle of something nice from the actual company, the Pernod Ricard company. So, but there's still availability from independent bottlings with these. I think fairly recently, Infrequent Flyers released an Altavanya. But it's actually one of the whiskies I actually used to find quite intriguing. And Chinanic's another one. So Chinanic, Big Diageo factory up at Orness. Both two distilleries that most people wouldn't have heard of and certainly probably unlikely to buy on a ordinarily kind of basis. But both of these released by Infrequent Flyers a little while ago, quite heavily sherried. So the dark bottle of the series, so maybe 6 or 7 bottles in the release, sold out just because of the colour. And you're thinking, People are not buying that because I'm pretty sure most of these people have never heard of Altavine, have no idea what it is, have never tried it before, but it's a colour of Coca-Cola, so I'll have that. And the same with Tunic, but yeah, you then got maybe something like a fantastic Ben Rinnes that is in a refill bourbon cask, and it's a beautiful light straw colour, and people are like, oh, I'm not touching that. But that to me would probably be the absolute outstanding dram of the series,
Yeah.
So yeah, the Coca-Cola coloured bottles always sell quick, and it does not matter what distillery it comes from.
It's so funny to me. It's so because I'm absolutely, look at this. I'm absolutely in love with this whiskey, and it's as pale as can be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Cara Gold. I mean, this is getting better and better and better in the bottle. It's probably lighter than that. I'm just like very yellow. That's one of the things that people have seen me on screen with the old leather from Inverurie. I've never ever had a good sort of lighting in a room, so I always look like I've either got jaundice, or I've seen a ghost, or I'm absolutely sunburnt. So yeah.
We didn't even. And speaking of your old leather days, we haven't even spoken about tractors yet.
We haven't spoken about tractors.
We got to 55 minutes before it came up. I thought we were going to escape it. Tractors and telegraph poles. I knew it was going to happen.
It's a scary tractor season just now because we're on tatty picking, potato picking, traditional October holidays in Scotland, picking the tatties. And the trailers that they use to transport these from the field to the shed at the farm are very, very long. And the tractors they tend to use are big, powerful, fast tractors because they're traveling over a bit of distance. And they're absolutely thumping through Elgin just now because they're obviously on a mission to get it done before it's dark and what have you. And the guys need their supper and maybe want home for a dram. But the pavement I walk on home is quite thin. So I've started taking a different route home just because it's a little bit scary for these things just brushing over your shoulder. Jesus Christ. So yes, I'm maybe not the biggest fan of tractors right now. They're scaring me with their speed and yeah.
I mentioned to you yesterday, I have a friend in Ireland who is a farmer, as a barley farmer, and I wrote to him after we got off and I said, hey, join us tomorrow because we can talk about your tractor. And he wrote back to me and he said that he was convinced I was setting him up for some sort of trap. I said, no, I'm not. He's like, no, this smells like a trap. I was like, I'm not trying to trap you. I mean, where's the trap? What am I going to do? What am I going to trick you? So I don't know if he's here or not. He would have said something by now if he were. He's too mouthy not to.
I thought you were just going to say, and here we have our next guest, Jimmy the tractor.
Live from his tractor, Kevin Kiley. But he's not joined us, I guess. But he might be out on his tractor as we speak. So, one of the things that, we also didn't get to talk about, at least not yet, and I know we're wrapping up here, so, but I'll throw it out there is, Russell has been hugely helpful. I'm trying to put together this project to make a film about the upcoming Cabrach distillery, and Russell's really been helping me with that. And, I don't really have anything to share or say about it. It's just that, it's a really cool story that I think really should be told. And, I'm really trying to there's basically a distillery being built in the Cabrach, which is just a few miles outside of Dufton, and was once the home to hundreds of illicit distilling equipment or operations. And now this is kind of trying to restore distilling to the valley, which has, been heavily depopulated.
I think that's the other aim for the project. The Cabrach Community Trust are really hoping to regenerate work and the population in the Cabrach. It's one of these places, if you haven't been there, that you take a drive over and you can just see the desolation, the ruined buildings, the empty buildings. I can only imagine people living there and what the conditions would have been like, because it's quite barren. Hence why it was a great place for illicit distilling, because there was lots and lots and lots of places to hide your still, and there would have been good opportunities to see any people coming towards you who may be excise men or troops or something like that. So, but yeah, and also a nice juxtaposition with the other home of whiskey on Islay, in Argyll, the home of the Campbells. So the Campbells and the Gordons were fierce enemies. and run very different operations, and we're loyal to very different people as well. The Gordon's been loyal to the Stuart family and the Jacobite kind of days, and the Campbell's been more loyal to government further south. So there's a fantastic story to be told there, and yeah, it's an interesting project.
Yeah, I really want to tell that story. It's funny. Maybe I mentioned this to you before, Keith. One of my oldest friends, literally since our mothers were friends growing up. Like, so my friend, he and I have known each other since we were infant. There's a picture of us. We're both like 6 months old. Like, we don't remember meeting each other. We've known each other for so long. And this is in Pennsylvania, but his name is Duncan Campbell. And when we were out on, I forget where we were, one of the islands, we were somewhere, and I was talking to some old man, and I mentioned something about Campbell's, and he said, "Oh, not another bloody Campbell." and I texted my friend Duncan that, and I said, and he wrote back, "Oh yeah, people hate us." I said, "Well, except for the ones who don't."
Long memories in Scotland. Yeah.
A few hundred years, you think it would be bad.
Well, I found a grave in the graveyard by the Historical Society on Isla. There's a grave of someone named Duncan Campbell. And I took a photo of that and sent it to him. And he wrote back, "Thank you."
Straight on to Ancestry.com to see if you could work out a link.
Yeah. I spilled more whiskey on my desk here.
Oh, for goodness sake, you need to learn how to drink whiskey properly, Greg.
Yeah, it's just a drop. Maybe I care too much. It's just individual drops. Plus, you can always use it as a good excuse to get but this is that Scapa. It's not easy to find.
You can't be spilling that. You need to be mopping it up and bringing the cloth out back into your glass again.
Yeah. Well, I just gave myself a wee little bit to wrap things up. I know it's after 2 now, or for me, it's after 10 for you guys.
It is indeed, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you guys for spending part of your Friday night with me. Everybody, not just the 2 of you, but everyone that's been watching and coming and going as we go, and some great questions, and I really appreciate it. I really encourage everyone to stay tuned over the next few months, because we're really excited about this bottling film, and I can tell you, because I have insider knowledge, that Gordon MacPhail is going to be heavily featured throughout this film, which I think it would be impossible to tell a story about independent bottling and not.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's a spit with The Water Life. There was a film about people more than whiskey, and obviously the Bruichladdich story came and weaved its way through it. Is there a similar narrative? You don't have to tell me what it is yet. Don't spoil the surprise. Is there a similar narrative developing in the other in the one?
There is and there isn't. There's not as much drama, I'll say that. This is much more fan service. This is a whiskey film being made for whiskey fans who are really curious about kind of going a step deeper. It's very much made in the style of The Water of Life. But I mean, I'll rattle off a couple of names here quickly, but I'm reluctant to do so, but I'm gonna. But I mean, we've featured Elixir and North Star Spirits and Single Cask Nation and Gordon MacPhail and Cadenheads and Adelphi and Compass Box and Isla Cask Company, which is, we picked them. It's a German independent bottler of Isla whiskeys. And that was just to us a unique angle to feature. Oh, and then the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. See, I'm forgetting stuff already. I mean, there's so many. And one of the things we wanted to explore is the difference in their business approaches. Oh God, Claxton's and Decadent, Whiskey Sponge.
Murray McDavid.
Watt Whiskey, Murray McDavid. Yeah, my God. It's just, there's so many, 43. I mean, there's 43.
Right.
And so it's been really kind of a more scattershot approach, but because I think it deserves it, and there's only a few that won't be featured, and that's just because they weren't interested, or just didn't get back to us. Barry Brothers and Rudd, I'm looking at you. Weems, I'm looking at you. Douglas Lang and Hunter Lang, they're there. So, but anyway, I'm gonna go drink some more independent bottling whiskey, guys.
Fantastic.
Sounds like a good way to spend the Friday.
Cheers.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Before we drop and say slange too.
Pleasure.
Keith saved a tiny little spit, right?
I didn't. I'm not as disciplined as that.
I can fill these off camera pretty easily.
It's the second one. It's okay. It's right.
Well, quick question. Have you guys heard of this? I think it's an American expression, but I never heard of it until I saw it in a TV show. Have you heard of a patch?
Patch.
A patch. Patch is a slang term meaning you refill your whiskey before it gets empty so you don't have to count it as a new whiskey. It's not a new one. It's just you're just patching the old one. You're just patching up the leak in the old one. But it's a bourbon thing. They call it a patch. I really liked it. So that's just a patch. It's not a new one.
Perfect.
This is a patch on my second whiskey.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah.
The guys at Against the Grain are saying slange. So once you guys come up here, we'll go for a pint at Against the Grain. That's Juliet's pub, Greg. It's a great
Oh,
place.
nice.
Keith, yeah.
Will do. All over it.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cool. Cheers,
Slange,
everybody.
guys.
Slange.